to this session in Unit 3. Up till now in Unit 3 we have discussed about what basically advertising is, and we also talked about the various steps involved in the process of designing an advertising campaign. We have talked about the first two of these steps, setting the advertising objectives and deciding the advertising budget in detail also. Now is the time for us to move to the third step, which is basically choosing the advertising message. And please understand that this particular step comprises of three sub-steps. The first one is message generation, then we have got message evaluation and selection, and the third one is message execution. What do we mean by message here? Message basically means the idea that we are trying to communicate to our target audience. So that is what we mean by the message here. So the first thing that we have to do is we have to generate different types of messages, and out of these different messages that we generate, then we select the ones which are more suitable and which suit my objective. So for that I will have to do a comparative evaluation, and then once we have done this selection, we go ahead and we execute the message. So that would be the third step, message execution. So these three steps are there. Let us talk about these steps in a little detail. As far as message generation is concerned, it would depend on positioning, and I hope you remember what positioning is all about. Positioning, if you remember, in the last few sessions we have discussed positioning. So positioning is basically trying to occupy a space in the mind of the customer, trying to create a particular kind of image in the mind of the customer. I told you that positioning does not mean what you do to the product. It does not relate to what you do to the product. It relates to what you do to the image of the product in the mind of the customer. Let me give you an example of Boroline. When Boroline was introduced in the market, there were so many antiseptic creams which are already there in the market. So Boroline thought that it is not going to be worthwhile to contest in the market with so many rival antiseptic creams. And then what did they do? They said, okay, fine, we will create a different positioning for ourselves. We'll try to have a different image for ourselves in the mind of our target audience. And then they came up with this new tagline, Khushbudar antiseptic cream. So Boroline was no more fighting, no more contesting with other antiseptic creams in the market. It had created a category of its own, the Khushbudar antiseptic cream, or the antiseptic cream with some fragrance. So this was the positioning that they tried to occupy in the mind of the customer, and through their ads and through their various promotional campaigns, they tried to occupy this particular image in the mind of the customer and were able to achieve considerable success. Right? So this is what positioning is all about. So in positioning, what you do is you basically create a image for your product in the mind of the customer. Right? So depending on the positioning will you come up with your message. So the message will have to depend on positioning. For example, if a particular brand of watches, they want to have a premium kind of a positioning in the mind of the customer, so naturally the message that they will send across to the target audience, the advertising campaign, should be accordingly designed. It should showcase the premium image of the brand, right? So message generation would basically depend on lot on the positioning that the company wants to have. Then when you are generating messages, you have got different theme alternatives. You can have different themes for your messages. There are different alternatives, there are different options which we can make use of. I am giving you just an indicative list. There are so many other options. So this is option number 1, that you have single benefit. So your advertising campaign would only be talking about one particular benefit of the brand. For example, you can have a look at this particular print ad which I have shown you. I am not showing you the broadcast ads or the video ads because of connectivity issues and other constraints, so I'll be relying more on the print ads. So if you look at this particular print ad, you would find out that the only benefit that they are highlighting is instant pain relief, and have a look at the punchline that they are using, ah se ah tak. So you will get an instant relief when you use this particular brand of pain reliever, Move. Move is basically a Paras pharmaceutical product. So this is an alternative that you can exercise. You can talk about just one benefit, just one main important benefit of your brand. Then another alternative could be to have a character talking about the benefits of your brand. For example, if you look at this particular ad, again this is a print ad. Here you see Revital Women. So this is basically a print ad for Revital Women. So Revital, which is a Ranbaxy product, they came up with a variant of their Revital brand specifically targeted on women, and they called it Revital Women. And see, now here this character is expressing the benefits of using Revital. So this character is here expressing benefits of using the product. So this could be another alternative that you can exercise. And then you can also come up with some kind of a narrative. Narrative is some voiceover is talking about the benefits of using a particular brand. So you can have a look at this particular example. Here the voiceover would be there. There would be a background sound which would be talking about this particular situation, and then it would be talking about how the product M-Seal helps in plugging the wet leakages also. So the whole theme basically talks about this aspect of M-Seal, and they have also specifically talked about this by using this word wet set, this phrase wet set, right? So these are examples of some of the alternatives that you can make use of, that you can exercise. However, there are some other alternatives also that you can exercise. So this is just an indicative list. Now once you have generated the message, so you have now a number of messages that you have generated. Out of these number of messages that you have generated, you would want to select only a few. You cannot go ahead with all of them. So what you will do is you will do a comparative analysis first. You will evaluate, you will do a comparative evaluation, and that is why this particular term has been mentioned here, evaluation. And then based on that evaluation, you decide which particular messages would you want to go ahead with, which particular messages would you actually want to execute, actually want to implement. So in the second stage, you have to do this comparative evaluation of all the messages that you have generated in the first stage, and then you decide, pick up maybe one or a few more for ultimate execution, for ultimate implementation, right? Now how do you do this evaluation and how do you make the selection? For that you have to take into account three aspects: desirability, uniqueness, how exclusive your message is, and how believable your message is. Now what do we mean by this? Now desirability means whether the message talks about some aspect that the audience is looking for, that the audience desires from the product. For example, if you are talking about your car, if you are selling a car and you are talking about your car, you should know as to what all attributes the target audience is looking for. If the target audience is looking for fuel economy, you can talk about fuel economy. If the target audience is looking for style, you can talk about style. If the target audience is looking for ease of servicing, then you can talk about that. Whatever aspects you are going to talk about in your message, whatever things you are going to talk about, whatever attributes you are going to talk about in your message, they should be the ones which are desired by the target audience. So that is one thing that you will have to keep in your mind, and for that naturally you will have to do some background customer research to find out what attributes does the customer prefer. So you have to put in those attributes, at least one or two of those attributes, and that will take care of the desirability aspect of your message, of your advertising message. Then what do we mean by exclusive? See, there are so many companies in the market. We have talked about so many companies operating in various sectors of the economy. We have talked about advertisement clutter. There are so many advertisements. If you look at TV, you will find so many advertisements. So it is naturally very, very difficult for the customer to retain the memory of a particular brand by just looking at the advertisement. However, you can ensure that the customer retains the memory of your brand by ensuring that your message is very, very different, very, very unique. It is very, very different from the other rival marketers' messages. So this is another thing that you have to look for, the exclusiveness nature of your message. And naturally the third aspect is the believability. Whatever claims you are making in your advertising message, those claims should be believable, because if they are not believable, then naturally the target audience is not going to buy your product, is not going to even try your product. So the claims made by you should be believable. So these three aspects you have to consider while doing a comparative analysis, comparative evaluation of the different messages that you have generated. And based on the result of this exercise, you will select one or maybe a few more advertising messages for final execution, for final implementation. Now let us move over to the third step, which is basically message execution, message implementation. Now what do we do here? You have, in the second step, decided which all advertising messages you are going to implement, execute. So that is what we are going to do here. So in message execution part, basically we talk about a few aspects. Number one, appeals. Which kind of appeal are you going to make use of in your campaigns? It could be the rational appeal or the emotional appeal or the moral appeal. Again, we are going to discuss them in detail. We have had a brief look at this particular topic in Unit 2 also. The second thing that you have to take into account is how you would execute the message. What would be the executing style? What would be the execution style? Again, this is something that we are going to talk about in detail in the coming sessions. And then the format element. So we'll be talking about all these aspects in the coming sessions in more detail, right? So these things you have to take into account while executing the message, while actually going for the implementation of the advertising message. Now, however, when you are implementing the advertising message, you are actually executing, you have to be wary of certain things. You have to ensure that whatever you are trying to showcase in your advertising campaign, that should not be unethical. So you have to be very, very considerate about your advertising message being ethical. We have talked about this aspect in Unit 1 also. So here I would not be taking this up in detail, but I'll give you a few examples of what we mean by ethical and what becomes unethical. So what is the line that demarcates ethical from unethical? So number one, there should be no false claims. You should not be making any false claims. Now I'll give you an example of however what happens in the Indian market. Now this is an article which actually appeared in one of the magazines, and it is, the headline is Marketers Roll Call of Shame, December 2019, right? And now here what basically here it talks about is that 77 ads were promptly withdrawn by the advertisers because there were complaints against them. And when there was a complaint, I hope you remember the mechanism. You go to SKI and SKI ordered the withdrawal. So 77 ads were promptly withdrawn by the marketers. Then there were some 225 misleading ads with false claims, out of which 124 belong to the education sector. Now be wary of this particular aspect. You would be going for your MBAs. Be wary of such claims. right? 124 out of these 225 ads, they actually were misleading ads and they were making false claims. Now this is something that you have to be wary of. You should not be making such false claims. Naturally it can cause a bad word of mouth, and it can also attract some penal action by ASCI, Advertising Standards Council of India. So you can have a detailed look at this media brief, right? So these are the things that you should avoid. Secondly, there should be no deception. You should not try to deceive the target audience into believing something which is actually not true. Now I have taken up this example. Now this is an interview which has appeared in the newspaper. On the face of it, it looks perfectly fine. Any newspaper can interview anybody. It could be a business newspaper interviewing somebody from LIC. But the problem is, as long as it is being shown as an interview, and it is actually an interview, it is perfectly fine. However, what has happened here is, it is not basically an interview, it is some kind of an article which has been sponsored by LIC. So LIC has basically paid for this to get published in a newspaper. So it has paid the newspaper to publish this interview. So this is basically not an interview done independently by the newspaper, by the media house, but it is an interview which has been deliberately placed in a newspaper by paying the newspaper some kind of fee, right? And why has LIC done this? They are trying to actually make the customer, make the target audience believe that this is actually an interview which has been conducted by the newspaper, right? And why they are doing this? Naturally, if it is an interview which has been conducted by newspaper, naturally you are going to, as a target audience, you are going to have greater amount of trust on such kind of interviews. And if it is some kind of a sponsored article which has been placed by the LIC itself, then naturally the trust factor is going to be low. And that is why, to increase the believability, LIC actually use this strategy. Now this is an example of deception, and this is known as an advertorial. What is an advertorial? Now remember this: an advertisement appearing as a news article. Basically this was an advertisement by LIC wherein they actually made one of their executives talk about the various LIC policies and how these LIC policies are better than other competitor policies in the market. Now, basically this was a advertisement, but it appeared as a news item, and that is why we use this term advertorial. Now advertorial is advertisement plus editorial, so it looks like a news item though it is an advertisement. So in reality it is an advertisement, it looks like a news article, right? So in India, if at all you are going to use an advertorial, you have to declare this at the bottom. So you have to declare it so that the customer is not deceived into believing that this is an actual news article, right? So this has to be declared. However, many times even this is not done. If a declaration is made that this particular news item is basically an advertorial, even that declaration is made in very small print, in a very small font size, so that the audience is not able to actually make out what has been written. So this now becomes unethical. Now again, whenever you are deciding your advertising message, you have to ensure that you should not be offending any ethnic group or minorities. I am taking a very recent example of what Fair and Lovely did. Fair and Lovely, I hope you remember that it is an HUL product, and now they have changed their brand name from Fair and Lovely and to Glow and Lovely, right? And they have actually been educating the customer about this change in brand name through various TV commercials, TV advertisements as well. Now why have they done this? Because earlier Fair and Lovely meant that those who have a darker complexion, they are probably inferior to those who have a fairer complexion. So this realization in 2020 made them change their brand name, and now they are Glow and Lovely and not Fair and Lovely. So this TV commercial you might have seen with Yami Gautam talking about this brand change, right? brand name change. So this is another thing that you have to talk about. You should not come up with an advertising message that offends, that is offensive, or that hurts the sensibilities of a particular religious group or a particular ethnic group or particular minorities, right? So these are the things that you have to take into account while executing your message. Now we are going to talk about appeals, execution style and format elements in greater detail in the coming sessions. Thank you very much.